Hello and welcome to Rush Roundtable. This is episode 185, where we'll be talking about the Big Wheel and Heresy off of 1991's Roll the Bones. Have a great panel for you today. We've got Chris Springer, got Alex Kelly, and Paul Cormier, and me, Paul Simon, as Ryan would say, not to be confused with Paul Simon. And we're going to start off this episode with the Big Wheel. So let's go start with the intro and the opening instrumentation. And then the lyrics go into, well, I was only a kid, didn't know enough to be afraid, playing the game, but not the way the big boys played. Nothing to lose, maybe I had something to trade, the way the big wheel spins. Well, I was only a kid on a holy crusade. I placed no trust in a faith that was ready-made. Take no chances on paradise delayed, so I do a slow fade. So obviously, whole idea of the Wheel of Fortune being incorporated into our ongoing theme on Roll the Bones of chance and fate. And Alex, you want to get us going, and then I'll jump in after?
Sure. So basically, Neil said in the album premiere that some people might look at these as rather autobiographical lyrics, but he was saying he was looking to go for something more universal. Which, I mean, the autobiographic nature, of course, right away you could think of it because already that first verse makes you think of circumstances. The idea of a boy alone so far from home. But as time goes on, I don't want to get ahead of us into the chorus, but you could sort of see where things become a little more universal, not just specific to someone like Neil. I'm going to make reference to the opening instrumentation too, because it's basically about four measures of like D sharp minor. Who writes in D sharp minor? Well, they do because they can and because they're awesome. And we know this. But I just love the fact that some of these later albums, there are certainly songs that are in keys like E minor, very common rock guitar keys. But some of these other keys that you would find on Hold Your Fire and certainly this album, D sharp minor, and then modulated into kind of an E major. And there's more to be said as we go on instrumentally, but that's just kind of fun. And certainly it fits Geddy's voice because he was, as we've said on other roundtables, kind of at a top end of his game as a vocalist, in this time period. But I don't want to dominate. I'm going to just sort of vault it over to someone.
All right, I'll pick it up on the Wheel of Fortune thing real quick, get that out of the way. Obviously, with the background in philosophy, I did a lot of reading for this and came up with it goes back as far as at least the 6th century BC, the whole idea of when studying cosmology and the origins of the universe, the whole idea of celestial spheres, which not even going to bother going into how many Rush songs can touch on that, but in that theme. But the whole idea of Rota Fortunae, the Wheel of Fortune, I did find an entry from Roman tragedian Marcus Pacuvius in the 2nd century BC. Something Neil would definitely read. So if he wasn't reading Pacuvius, he was reading Plato, Ptolemy, Aristotle, Copernicus. But it says, philosophers say that fortune is insane and blind and stupid, and they teach that she stands on a rolling spherical rock. They affirm that wherever chance pushes that rock, Fortuna falls in that direction. They repeat that she is blind for this reason, that she does not see where she's heading. They say she's insane because she is cruel, flaky, and unstable. Stupid because she can't distinguish between the worthy and the unworthy. So I couldn't find anything that encapsulated it better in such short verse than that. So opening up as far as the idea of the big wheel.
Yeah, I also looked at the wheel as a in those first couple of lines where he's talking about I was only a kid and know enough to be afraid, all this, that there's, Neil's always had this kind of ongoing theme of people searching for things, people seeking out, whether it's knowledge or faith or whatever it is, answers from the universe. And I always thought of this song as like, is the universe spinning the wheel for us and we're just landing wherever it puts us, or are we spinning this wheel saying, what's next for me? And an example, around the time when this album came out, I was about a year out of college at the time, but one of my best friends, he had like gone to one school, dropped out, went to another school, dropped out, and he was just kind of like bouncing around and doing things. And then he's thinking, oh, maybe I should move out west, or maybe I'll go to Arizona or something like that. And my other friend Jim and I would always look at him and go, you know, that he was just spinning this big wheel, and that he would go wherever it landed. So that's what I always got out of the song, is that it was, not just but a thing of the wheel as being something that we use to try and search for what we want or what we need out of life.
I think we've all had that one friend, that drifter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just doesn't know what he wants to do. Just kind of like take wherever life takes you.
Yeah. He's the most stable one among us, but now. but,
oh, life is cruel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Leaving my hand, but never mind.
Uh-huh.
The other thing I did pick up on this first verse real quick is it starts off with the irony where I was only a kid on a holy crusade, but I placed no trust in a faith that was ready made. So an irony twist there. And even the next line, take no chances on paradise delayed. So get right in. So I do a slow fade. So going back to the theme, this album with Neil's writing, we know he was working pretty hard at it and studying writing. Definitely irony. And there is a positive spin on that one where we've talked about in Bravado, where, the world is my oyster. What am I going to take from it? So Chris, going back to what you were saying, that sounds a lot like, what can I do? Spin the wheel and see what happens, where that's going to change up. I'm glad you pointed that out. Which will take us into the chorus of playing for time, don't want to wait for heaven, looking for love, for an angel to forgive my sins, playing with fire, chasing something new to believe in, looking for love the way the big wheel spins. So again, we've got that alliteration with looking for love, etc. But
that's just so, to me, that's so universal, because how many songs have the phrase looking for love in it? I wound up thinking of Eddie Murphy's impression of Buckwheat and his rendition of Wookin' Panub. I couldn't help but just think of, and in this case, I'm not trying to impugn Neil for being, like so commonplace, but it's, as he said, he wanted something universal, and, in referencing back to the idea of nothing to lose, maybe as something to play or trade, sorry. Some of that first verse, just really setting the stage of, you're a kid, quote unquote, young adult, late teen. What do you have? Well, you have no experience or minimal. You're not playing the way, and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, everyone's out there kind of looking for love, and playing with fire. I feel like that references back to Dreamline, with the idea that we're only immortal for a limited time. So the idea that, you have more of an ability to really walk close to that Icarus edge, or fly close to that Icarus perimeter, I guess, as a young person.
Yeah. And again, he's establishing that innocence and individualism, two things, as has been pointed out, it's been written about constantly as a springboard, as a launching point before the theme. It's a universal introduction before, where does this take us? Good.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I could jump ahead to the next verse, when we're talking about a commonplace line like looking for love, he rhymes chance, dance, and romance, which is one of those things I would always, if I'm ever arguing lyrics with somebody, if I'm talking about, how, Rush's music is better than everybody else's, I was like, Neil never said, let's dance and take a chance on romance, which is like the dumbest line in the world, but I've never understood what taking a chance on romance ever meant. But he does it in a slightly different way, so I don't fault him for it. But it is interesting that he chose those three words.
And again, it goes back to the alliteration, that certain writing style that he, using similar. He didn't say searching for love, looking for love flows. Again, he was in the writing, working on his writing very intently for this album, so it flows.
And also,
now thanks to Alex, that song has been ruined for me, because every time I hear "Looking for Love," I'm going to imagine Buckwheat singing it.
It's funny.
It's how my brain works, right? It's just going to stick there now.
Yeah, I mean, I went into tonight with actually Time and Motion in my head, so it's just the things that get stuck in your head, because I listened to that today in the car. Yep. But also in the looking ahead in advance, to the next verse where he also uses the word advance and circumstance, which is one of those things that makes me think that is he reaching back to hemispheres with the idea of here's a kid going out making their way in the world and in circumstances, and now we're heading into maybe a couple of nods to that too. Just yeah.
Well, I'll get us there, and then we can jump right back to it. Well, I was only a kid cruising around in a trance, prisoner of fate, victim of circumstance. I was lined up for glory, but the tickets sold out in advance, the way the big wheel spins. Well, I was only a kid, gone without a backward glance, going for broke, going for another chance, hoping for heaven, hoping for a fine romance, if I do the right dance. And what I will throw on here is this is almost like fate is against it. Those first 4 lines where in the intro, it was optimistic. I won't say this is pessimistic, but now it seems like things are happening to him. Going back to what Chris said at the start of it. First verse, out there, seeing what our writer can do, our protagonist, and now it's things are happening to that person. And how do I deal with this?
Yeah. And those are more like commonplace themes, going for broke, going for another chance, those kinds of lines. It's interesting. I never thought of that before, but it's interesting. It's all in this one song,
Well, I've been waiting for these roundtables. Roll the Bones and Presto.
Well, and he was doing a good job with this album, Roll the Bones and Presto, of advancing a protagonist storyline with so many songs. The idea of here I am beginning. I'm beginning at the song. I'm beginning with this person's story. And now we're getting into the middle. Now we're getting farther into the middle. Are we even going to look back? In this case, Neil references other songs, many other songs, obviously, like Time Stands Still, as far as Without a Backward Glance. I mean, some of us, like myself included, a lot of backwards glances, way too many backwards glances. Neil, obviously, he was looking forward.
Always, yeah.
Most excellent thing I can do today.
Host a roundtable.
I try. Thanks everybody for being here.
Mhm.
All right. And then it takes us into another chorus and then the instrumental interlude. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to do the chorus again. I'll do it towards the end. But instrumental interlude, anyone got anything to say? I like the layers on the guitars a lot here.
Yeah.
It's not just, and I know all 3 of you can speak more to that than I can, but the fact when doing my listens and my listen to the instrumental covers of these, I love how the guitars are layered here. So,
Well, I know there were many songs where Lifeson was saying he didn't want to do solos, like the Camera Eye. He didn't want to do a solo, and which wound up being this monster solo. Yeah. I remember an interview where he said
I can't imagine.
Thinking, I should be doing. Oh, I know. Yeah. After the fact, it's like, yeah, how can that not be there? But at this point, some of these songs clearly were more conducive to, as we're saying, an instrumental interlude, and not really, hey, I'm going to rip or work the bar on my PRS. At this point, they bring in the intro chords. It's a re-intro, but he does have some high leads overdubbed, so it's really a legit interlude, which certainly became more of a thing in the 90s, because you look at I was actually going over Islands in the Sun even though that was from 2001, with a student this weekend, the Weezer song, and the solo, quote unquote, was really more of a melodic interlude. Smells Like Teen Spirit, also from 91, more of a melodic interlude, not so much of a solo. So it certainly became more commonplace in, rock back then at that time.
even Slash's stuff on Use Your Illusion, yes, some of it because it's him is a solo from the same year or same year and a half somewhere. But to me, the more interesting things are and now I'm going to place this here as opposed to look at. And speaking of, I love the use of synths in this song. I love it.
Oh yeah,
definitely. Very layered. You can tell they're big on texture. I mean, yes, they always are, but this song specifically, I think it's unsung for that. I think their layers with this one work really well with the song, and
it's just kind of sitting on top of that. Like you're not really sure exactly.
Build that soundscape. Yes,
it is. Yeah. And in that musical interlude, rather than having a guitar playing some kind of melody, you've got Geddy with his OOOs, throughout it, kind of providing a melody on top of the on top of the chord structure.
All right, jump back on the lyrics. In the interlude there, wheel goes round, landing on a twist of faith. Taking your chances, you'll have the right answers when the final judgment begins. Wheel goes round, landing on a leap of fate. Emphasis mine. Life redirected in ways unexpected. Sometimes the odd number wins the way the big wheel spins. And I love twist of faith and leap of fate, switching those up. Again, simple wordplay, but man, how effective is that? Seriously.
Yeah, my favorite line of this entire story that he tells in the tour book, and one I've always remembered, where he says, "Taking your chances, you have the right answers," was the "You might have lived a good long life as an exemplary Christian, only to be met at the gates of heaven by Muhammad."
I always remember that one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And not to go too far on a tangent, but it's one of my favorite movie lines of all time from The Seventh Sign, with Demi Moore and Jürgen Prochnow. But it says something about, this person believes that person's not saved. That person believes that this person's not saved. What if we're all wrong? I saw that when I was probably 14 or so. That has stuck with me my entire life. It's like, what if we're all wrong?
Yeah.
So don't jump too many. And I won't get too preachy on that. And the chorus goes again, playing for time, don't want to wait for heaven, looking for love, the way the big wheel spins, and a fade out.
So the song does a slow fade, which is referenced at the beginning.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. I mean, Neil certainly had, Neil, and also as Geddy said in one of the Strombo interviews, very prominent as far as being more atheist agnostic, as far as Geddy saying that, recognizing what happened to, not just his family, but many others. That's, how can this be because of, the Holocaust? And certainly with Neil looking in, being the ultimate skeptic and looking into everything, the idea is that he references heaven and faith so much, but as he's saying, it's universal. He's not making it his. And but at the same time too, you go back to the penultimate album, the studio album, and he's saying that he's not faithless. His faith is in others and beyond. Beyond what was sold to would have been sold to your average Canadian kid growing up, as far as that goes.
Yeah. And as is kind of on a theme on this album, the thing that he always said, and I think it's even in the tour book, is just deal with it. It is what it, he says that in the documentary, that it is what it is, deal with it. And that's kind of like, why are we here? Because we're here. Deal with it.
And
some of it in the final song.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I loved about all the philosophy I was reading for this, and I'm like, he puts his faith in people. That, again, for someone who started off as such a fierce individualist, and then watching that progression, it's come up a couple times on our roundtables for Roll the Bones, watching that progression where he's not putting his faith in that something bigger isn't a thing. It's all of us. It's people. He was such a voracious reader. These minds and these readings, he was never, he couldn't put a book down. So think about it. He's looking to everybody else and saying, what can I learn from them? Then what can I do in the meantime? Where it goes from the individual to a wider scope, that almost utilitarian view, which I'm going to hold off for Heresy on. So closing thoughts on, and I'm sorry, the last verse, I said optimistic and then almost pessimistic. That last one, by the way, it sort of evens out, and it did remind me of Bravado, where were we at? Going for Broke. There it is. I was only a kid. The last, we passed it already, but Gone Without a Backward Glance, Going for Broke, Going for Another Chance. That's where it evened out. I meant to throw that in with that last one there. So there's three, and the third one is neutral, for lack of a better way of putting it, which I like.
I just want to say Geddy does a fantastic job singing the song. The vocal melody is fantastic. This is one of the only examples of him doing like a little mini run with his voice with that looking for love.
Yeah.
He doesn't do that too often. And I just remember hearing that going, holy shit, that was really cool. And the harmonies are just freaking awesome. those final two choruses are just amazing. And my friend and I always would hear in our heads like a brass section at the end coming in. Bam, 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 that's what we always used to sing when it came along.
I think that's the Rupert Hine influence kicking in.
Because
you see it in Presto, you see it in Roll the Bones. I think it's documented. Like his thing was getting Geddy to sing the harmonics, right? Use his natural range.
Yes.
And we see it in songs like I personally, the Big Wheel, I see that could have been a single that could have been released from the album. It's got the I guess the enough commercial way it's written, the traditional verse, chorus, instrumentation, and then verse, chorus again. Like a little long for commercial radio, 5 minutes, but
the radio edits happen.
I was just gonna say you can have a radio edit about you cut out the instrumentation or a verse or somewhere, but
it doesn't get too rushy in the middle for people.
they have a lot of 145 in there in certain parts. So
right.
You consider their highest charting single was New World, man. I definitely think this could have been a single.
Oh yeah.
I
was going to say
it can be done.
And I was going to say, and I had kind of put a mental note to talk about, there's no guitar solo, but I don't think we all agree that in this instance, the instrumentation part, the bridge, just works perfect, just to kind of bridge to the last verse. And as much as we love a good Alex Lifeson solo, I guess it's not always required.
Sometimes,
the synths are being used as a embellishment, just to color. You know what I mean? But the guitar is back in the forefront, heading towards counterparts. So, overall good song. I mean, I played it on repeat for the last 2 days. So it's on my head right now. But that was my first impression. Is this could have been a single, because Roll the Bones had Roll the Bones and Ghost of a Chance, but this could have been like a third single if they really wanted to.
Well, and Where's My Thing actually was released in college radio stations, which I think is extra cool. Mostly alternative and college radio stations got it.
And I did hear Bravado and JCPenney in the summer of '92.
I remember hearing Dreamline for the very first time on the radio. I was calling WNEW back in the day in New York. Do you have the new Rush single yet?
At WLUP, and I want to say XRT in Chicago, but maybe they were playing Where's My Thing. I'd have to check. Cool. All right. Last thoughts on Big Wheel before we roll into Heresy. See that there?
Was it one of his books that he said, spin the wheel, get a prize? Was that Neil? He talked about something where he was. I mean, it went back probably to his days as a carny in Lakeside Park, but there was
still churning through the book.
I just remember that phrase of his saying, "Spin the wheel, get a prize." Might have been in one of his books. Anyway,
I'll keep an eye out for it. I've got the Instagram thing with the professor's pen, so
okay, good.
That up if I find it. All right, taking us into Heresy, song 7, if memory serves. Second song, second side. The intro and the opening instrumentation, which we're going to have to talk about, obviously, and then going into the lyrics, all around that dull gray world, from Moscow to Berlin. People storm the barricades, walls go tumbling in. The counter-revolution, people smiling through their tears. Who can give them back their lives and all those wasted years? All those wasted years, all those precious wasted years, who will pay?
Which is interesting that someone like Neil, who is very inclined to not waste his time searching for wasted years, little shout out to the fact that Ryan also has the Iron Maiden page going too, is really commenting and focusing in on the fact that you have all of these people from a former Soviet Union, which occupied many countries, from Asia over to Europe, with, as he's saying, I mean, at that point you gauge, from our measure, they were wasted years. But from, you would think from his usual stoic sensibility, it's the sort of thing that's their timeline. That's their life. That was their experience, for good or for bad, for good and for bad. And I certainly know, and I think we probably all know various people who might have come over here from former Soviet countries in '91 or at some point in the '90s, and they were very happy to be over here.
Yeah.
But at that point, they were looking at, all right, I'm in the West. Now I'm going to live my life the way I'd like to.
Mm-hmm. There's refreshing take on that topic that was very topical. You had Winds of Change, Scorpions, there was Right Here, Right Now, Jesus Jones, and it was a lot of, isn't this great? Everything's wonderful now. We're all coming together, brothers. And Neil was like, what? Now what? What the fuck? What was that all about? And I kind of like that it didn't go down. I mean, it could have turned into something really cheesy in the hands of somebody less astute.
And for many people following for those who stayed in Russia and Poland, Belarus, etc., for a long time, life wasn't great. I mean, obviously the four of us probably all saw the wall being chiseled away in real time, and you figure Neil would have been watching that too. And right at the time that Presto was released, so this had to be the next album. But I mean, for many people who remained, for instance, in Russia and Moscow, Berlin, there was kind of a rise of various organized crime syndicates, or kind of a black market that was gouging people before they could settle in. I mean, that's a given in any civil war situation around the world. So I mean, like you just said,
people take advantage of the chaos and.
Neil wasn't going for, as you were saying, kind of the, hey, all is great in fluffy stuffed animals for everyone. It's sort of, it was brutal, and it's still going to be brutal until things can be less brutal.
Well, he kind of goes into the next verse, right? Like,
I was going to say the first one, who will pay? What I wrote down for that is the price was time. All those wasted years. For the first verse, I'll have two more as we get there, but yes.
Because that's the one thing that you can't, the one commodity we can't regain is that time.
One of three. I got three on here, but yes, I agree.
All right.
All around that dull gray world of ideology, people storm the marketplace and buy up fantasy. The counter-revolution at the counter of a store. People buy the things they want and borrow for a little more. All those wasted years, all those precious wasted years, who will pay? And the opening invitation, by the way, we didn't cover it. The drums. Someone with more music knowledge than me, please throw something on there. Because
it's. I mean, if you compare the Big Wheel to Heresy, I mean, they're night and day. Here's Big Wheel's pretty simple drum beat overall. Well, for Neil standards. Heresy, it kind of reminds me of Bravado to a certain degree. He kind of plays around the kit. It's not a standard hi-hat snare. He plays a lot with the toms and little splash cymbals, and it's just. But early in the song, it's kind of more soft spoken. Then it gets.
And what's that
rush? It gets more. Well, the initial march. Yeah, yes. That's the initial drum roll, kind of marching, kind of drum roll. Just sets the tone for the song right off the top, right? Like it's. So
and it's so fat that must have been multi-tracked, no? Or was it just recorded in such a way? Because it sounds like about 15 drummers going.
I don't know enough about how recording methods. I really don't know it. I never looked at it that way. I looked at it as just Neil doing his roll. It's right. It's not a single stroke roll. It's more like just a traditional roll, but it's. I mean, he's done that for a few songs before, right? He starts off with their drum rolls, so I think it's just to set the tone about what the song is going to be about, and then he just gets started with the hi-hat and just kind of works his way around the kit. So it's just a beautiful melody. But then as the song progresses, he gets more into a traditional, more rock beat, right? The first verse is kind of really soft, and it's kind of just.
But then the second verse doesn't have the tom that isn't he doing a bunch of that? It's almost like Scars, but on acoustic drums as opposed to it's still kind of tribal.
Yes, but it's not electronic tribal. It's actual
right.
And and he was using the new Ludwigs, and I find they sound really nice.
Beautiful sound.
But it's a beautiful sound. It's unfortunate that the recording mix is. You know what I mean? It's kind of. I mean, we've talked about this with Presto and Roll the Bones. It's whoever. I remember reading the name of the audio engineer. His name was Steven something. I'd have to look it up, but Rupert Hines brought him in, and I can put Rush on Spotify and just random, and I'll hear a song from Roll the Bones, and all of a sudden I'll hear a song from another album, and I go, whoa, that's a big difference just in the overall sound. It sounds really cool.
I had been listening.
Don't blame the engineer. They do what they're told.
And this is why I struggle, because this is the Rupert Hines sound.
Yes.
At the end of the day, I mean, he's the producer, right? Like,
he had a lot to do with mix.
Of course.
So,
I mean, I read that they had picked up tricks from previous albums like Peter Collins for Hold Your Fire and Moving not Moving Pictures, my gosh, Power Windows.
Power Windows.
And they had brought that with them, but Rupert Hine, I think he'd worked with a lot of artists. In the industry. So I mean, he had a way of, I don't know. You notice it when you go to Counterparts and you go, oh, completely different ballgame, right? Like just the sound, the way it's
Tina Turner, the Fix. You can hear that Rupert Hine.
I was thinking you throw on a Fix album, you can hear the similarity there with the guitar and keyboard, especially.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean the opening march. I mean, it also has you thinking of how the Soviets always had their parades. It was always let's parade these missiles and the show of power.
That's the visual. That's the visual I have when I hear the drum roll.
Yeah. It was just the stark gray architecture in Warsaw or in Moskva, and the idea of the armies marching through to show, hey, we're all tough. Although we're bankrupting ourselves in Afghanistan for 10 years. Wait, who else could say that? The British in the 1800s.
No stones being cast, exactly. But and the other note I threw on here real quick, that whole capitalism second verse was the price, and this one, first one is time, second one is money. Because clearly the allusion to was it the counter revolution at the counter of a store. People buy the things they want and borrow for a little more. Very clearly talking about, okay, you've got your change. Now here, well, I wasn't going for that pun. And now here's your change. And was it, not going to get into better and worse, but it, as was mentioned, it brought its own
better and worse. Yeah. It had its own counterparts of better and worse.
Exactly.
Simultaneously. Yeah, it's puntastic tonight.
Gosh, don't quit your day job. Holy jeez. It's all good.
I'm okay now.
And there was also, but people also had a wider selection of things to buy, because trade markets were opened, and I don't know if that would have been the first time they'd be able to get a pair of Levi's jeans, but it's something like that that would come.
Would have been inundated, sure.
Yeah. And who was it? One of you guys mentioned in the notes, and it was in the tour book about all those, one of the things that they suffered through was having to buy, having to wear bad suits, and because they couldn't get anything decent. They couldn't make anything themselves. They couldn't get anything.
They had to make things by quota. This factory was required to make X number of suits in X amount of time, and if they accidentally sewed through a seam in the sleeve and sewed it shut, well, that's his suit. And all right, if you have needle and thread, fix your suit.
Yeah. And then I remember during the radio release, the interviewer mentioned that line about having to wear bad suits. And I don't know if Getty and Alex had not read that yet, and maybe they hadn't read the release that Neil did, but Alex was laughing, and it went into a little Rodney Dangerfield. Oh, times are tough, let me tell you. But didn't they thank CNN in the liner notes or something like that? Because I remember Getty saying something about that during the making of this album. He said there were a lot of things going on that made it hard to turn away from the TV and go back to work.
Yep, I remember that. And then the chorus 2 times where it says, "Do we have to be forgiving at last? What else can we do? Do we have to say goodbye to the past? Yes, I guess we do." Funny thing that jumped out at me about that was there's looking at the us-them mentality here for just a second, since Neil's been so inclusive with these lyrics and he's been expanding it to different points of view, not to go back to the perception route of Presto, but them and us, two different ways of looking at this. Do we have to be forgiving at last? Forgiving the way things were, or for them, forgiving what happened to them in the past in order to move on? There's two different ways of looking at that, at least. But those are the two that jumped out at me. Do we have to say goodbye to the past? On the us side of it, in the Western world, it was, okay, so we just forget about how it was always us versus them, and now we're all, it's all new people and new mindset. Or do we have to say goodbye to the past, meaning there's that way of looking at it, or do we forget, or do they have to forget what's happened to them? So I love that dichotomy. There's, like I said, at least two ways of looking at it. But again, him writing in such a way that allows for multiple interpretations. I will never get tired of that. That's why we've discussed different things. I think of the Presto roundtables where there were 2 or 3 different points of view. This is what I got of it, or this is, it's like, pretty sure he was writing for all of them. He may have had an inspiration, but he specifically wrote, particularly these 2 albums to start with, where he wanted them to have multiple interpretations. So another instrumental.
I love the music in the choruses. I mean, nobody plays arpeggios like Alex, and it's just, and I love the sound of the guitar. And this has never been one of my favorites of their songs, but that part is I just love that musically. I think it's great.
And I love that it's featured here. Exactly, that do.
Yeah.
You guys know it and get to it better
like bravado, yeah.
But I like that it actually is, instead of a solo, again, it's featured here. It's like, now look at this. Sonically, I absolutely love that about the song.
Reminds me a little bit of the instrumental break in Entre Nous. Same kind of thing. It's also an interlude with no solo, but it's just
so it's a middle 8. So he's got his arpeggio. Halfway through, he brings in a higher overdub, and that goes away because it's only there for 2 measures, just to kind of, arpeggio. Yeah, back to normal. Moving on.
Yeah, and a little dissonance. Cool.
All right, after the interlude,
guitar.
Take it home with. All around this great big world, all the crap we had to take. Bombs and basement fallout shelters, all our lives at stake. The bloody revolution, all the warheads in its wake. All the fear and suffering, all a big mistake. All those wasted years, all those precious wasted years, who will pay? So in this one, the price, lives, bloodshed. So 3 things that cannot be replaced: time, money, and bloodshed.
Yeah. And that talks about how that whole period affected us in the West. Exactly. That people, I don't remember, I'm not old enough to remember that, but I know my older brothers and sisters had to do the, go under the desk, those drills. In school,
yeah.
I started at school like mid 70s, early 70s, but
there was a point. Early 80s, I went to a karate tournament in the southern tier of New York, and I happened to stay at one of my grandmother's brother's houses, which was kind of a mid-century house that had a fallout shelter in the basement. Oh. And that was the first and only time I've ever seen a legit fallout shelter. But it didn't have like a vault door or anything. It was more like this space that had, it was all concrete, but it had this space with a little bit of like baffling to walk through, as far as just kind of being a little set back from the rest of the basement, and just the idea that, one of these 1960s, not, mid-century, not 50s, but 60s were mid-century. And you just think of, as far as that Cold War era of design, with the notion of saying, well, we're thinking of this. Kids are ducking and covering because that'll help you if, bomb detonates, or ICBM detonates. But, we're going to have this little space with some canned goods and whatnot to last a nuclear winter.
Yeah.
We've all seen the day after that those cans aren't going to outlast anything.
Yeah. There was a whole Twilight Zone episode called The Shelter, about a guy who built a shelter and everybody thinks he's crazy. And then they feel that, they learn in the episode that they need it. and they all come, bashing in, and everybody's terrible to each other trying to get into the shelter, and then it turns out to be a false alarm, and and everybody at the end is like, oh, can we be friends again? I don't remember exactly what it was, and the guy's just like, we can't go back after this, after the way you acted towards me and the way you acted towards each other and everything like that.
Very similar Simpsons episode too. When
Yes,
they had
I was about to say that. Yep, the Simpsons episode. Yeah, Flanders is everyone's crowded in, and it's Flanders' shelter, and then
Right.
basically just saying, "All right, I'll go out and be the one to die, so all the rest of Springfield can be horrible."
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
out there singing. He's out there singing by himself.
Yeah.
They're all like,
Hey,
Yeah.
Sarah, Sarah.
And it was
But
the baby
anyway, I
ox.
suppose with a different song, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I found in the research for this, the idea of Neil putting in all the crap we had to take. This is just now is one of the rare times I've used that word, because vulgarity or profanity notwithstanding that people might throw out there, there's always something about this word that I'm always just like, really? That's your go-to?
Mhm.
It's not vulgar enough to be hardcore, but it's not clean enough to be clean. It's just like this mid type word that's, and that's something that was referenced somewhere, that, like also with Presto, with Christ, what have you done? And the
Mhm.
one other song that I'm forgetting at the moment, with the idea that Neil,
Dog
Was it?
Years with
Sad
Son
son of a bitch. Yeah.
and there's a fourth
Yeah.
one, and that's the one I'll be stuck on, of course. It'll
okay,
be
but yeah,
Yeah.
but
When he said "fuck
obviously
you,"
Neil-
whatever song that was. I don't remember what it
well,
was.
but that's the thing. Neil always kept it, much like Seinfeld. Neil wasn't working blue. Basically, he wasn't. He goes from the D&D lyrics of the '70s to, at this point where he's being more, some might say, introspective,
Introspective.
and
Mhm.
or he's being very, very matter of fact, very in your face, but not nasty in your face. He's being, well, even you think of, the historical songs. This is an historical song, much like Manhattan Project, an historical song.
Which
And
is
then if
interesting
we
to take from it.
yeah, or foreshadowed of virtuality. I mean, some of the people, some of the Erics of the world could take issue with the idea of it being a little too time capsule as far as, oh, this is dated, but it's like, well, it's an historical song that was written in that moment of history, in the mid '90s. So this was written. How could you not write a song about the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall?
Mhm.
Even Jesus Jones did. Even the Scorpions did.
Right.
Rush just said it better.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, and the lyrics do repeat until the fade out with again another fade. All those precious wasted years, who will pay all those wasted years? And if there's anything Donna's taught us, when a line is repeated, Neil is trying to tell us something. This song needed to end on a fade out, and it's one of the few songs I'm glad they didn't do live, because I do think, all thin mix notwithstanding, they really nailed the sound. Outside of the thin mix, when it comes to the things we've talked about, and then this fade out, this song needed a fade out, whether it was introspection or whether it was just, I'm going to leave this thought here, something that Alex, I know you brought up on previous roundtables, us together, where it's like, okay, here's the thought, now run with that.
It's
Excellent.
interesting that you said about playing it live. I knew that they wouldn't play this one live, but thinking about it, like the production value of this song would have been awesome. Like the films they could have played and all of that stuff.
The things you said about the drum, that would have been a hell of an intro, but
Yeah.
unless they could have done it that way, which they could have. I really like the way it Disco Studio. A lot of people have the preferences and all that. I just think Studio, they got the feel really, really right. And again, going back to what I said before, that's why I love these albums, Presto and Roll the Bones, because they really focused on the feel of them. So, parting thoughts on Heresy? Have we said it all?
We've probably said it all.
You've said it all. That being said, thank you everybody for being here. Thanks for watching. Please leave us a like, subscribe so you never miss an episode, and comment. Start a dialogue in the comments section. And thank you for joining us.